Good evening, St. Louis soccer fans, and welcome in to STL Sports Central and the City Central postgame. I am your host, Matthew Rocchio. Thank you so much for joining us on this late Saturday evening, almost Sunday morning, as we bring you this City Central postgame. This postgame, of course, is brought to you by our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook, where the crown is yours. It is also brought to you by our business banking partners at Home Bank. From business lending to everyday banking, Home Bank has been with us since day one here at STL Sports Central as a trusted partner. Business isn't just about numbers, it's about relationships. And with Home Bank, those relationships make all the difference. Home Bank is the team behind our team at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank or call 855-577-2001. That's myhomebank.bank, or right there on the screen, call 855-577-2001. Home Bank, member FDIC. More than a bank, they're your business partner, of course. Supporting our sponsors is how you support us here at STL Sports Central, but we have soccer to talk about, not necessarily the game, as a lot of these post games have become here in the closeout the season. I think a lot of tonight's going to be more like a podcast talking about next season than really more talking about tonight. We'll get into what happened here in the 2-2 draw against RSL as they do slip into the playoffs thanks to some late night heroics from LAFC. We can dive into that. If you guys really care about it, I want you to drive this show as we always do. Of course, jump into the comments into our YouTube chat right now. If you want to get at me on Twitter, I can also do that. I'm going to be going through a lot of the post-game comments made from today, bringing up my Twitter to do that because there were some fascinating things said in the post-game as everything is, as I say in the title here, everything is starting to look towards 2026. Decisions are being made. And of course, that's one of the big pieces of news. Before we talk about what happened in the 2-2 draw against RSL, let's talk about the big news coming out of today's game. And that was before today's game. And the announcement came in a piece of audio where Roman Burki said, I'm not going anywhere, St. Louis. And then it flashed up on the screen that Roman Burki had been announced as an extension through 2027. So here's the thing. That was interesting for a lot of reasons. We've talked a lot about Roman Burki potentially re-signing with St. Louis City SC on these shows, on Boots on the Ground, going back to when Will Bratton was still with us, and we were breaking down all the reasons they should, maybe the reasons they shouldn't, and all that now comes to the head of that Roman Burki has signed a 2-year extension. Like all contracts in the MLS, seemingly it does have a option year going into 2028, but the big news was both on the broadcast and also, I believe, Tom Bogert on Twitter was also pointing this out as well. The news that the contract extension meant that Roman Burki would be a designated player for 2026. So as soon as that happens, that kind of becomes the biggest story here for St. Louis City SC. Because right out of the gate, when they were building the team in 2023, Roman Burki was a DP, a designated player, and he was a designated player in 2024. And everyone criticized the City build because no one else in the MLS has a designated player goalkeeper. And that remains true. There are a couple teams who have U22 goalkeepers. There's a couple teams that have TAM level goalkeepers, but nobody else has a DP goalkeeper. And so that does surprise me right out of the gate that Roman Burki is going to be a designated player for next season. But reading between the lines and going through how this breaks out for the roster designation for St. Louis City SC, Roman Burki was signed to a contract that paid him about $1.5 million, $1.7 million, right in that area, bottom line, for his first 3 seasons. And that's why he was a designated player, because it was just over 1.7, but he was right at that level where they could buy him down pretty easy with allocated money. And then he was a TAM level player, which is what they did this year. When they went to the 2x4, the U22 model, 2 designated players, 4 U22 players, they had to buy down Roman Burki to make that happen. That's one way they were able to do it. So Roman Burki sitting at about $1.7 million salary, I don't think his salary is getting increased that much with this extension. Partially because of his age, partially because his play has been a little bit held back this year. I think he's getting a little bit of a raise. But do I think that raise is going to take him beyond the level where they can still buy down his contract back to a TAM level? Maybe that doesn't happen until the summer window in 2026. But I don't think that all the DP slots are going to be taken up, at least not for the entire year. Maybe for this first window in the winter. I know that's still going to piss plenty of fans off, but potentially this winter, there is only one DP slot because, again, they can move to from the 3-3 designated players, 3-2-22. They can move to the 2 designated players, 4U22 model. They can move from the 4 to the 3. The difference is they don't get extra general allocation money, GAM, if they go back to the 3x3 model. But they can because they are most likely shedding their 4th U22 contract in Chris Durkin this year. So there is a way that they can open up a 3rd DP slot for the first half of next year. Then they could buy down Roman Burki midway through the season because they do have a lot of allocated money, both target allocated money and general allocation money. They have that money that they could buy down Roman in the summer. And then in the summer, when we have talked about it before, there's an issue with being able to get players because it's the off season over in Europe. And this summer is going to be especially odd and weird because it's a World Cup summer. Now I know the World Cup usually ends a little bit earlier in the summer and the MLS windows later in the summer, but nonetheless, there will be a chance in the summer window then to maybe then use another DP slot if they would so want to. There's other things they can move around that I've talked about. If they did move to the 3 designated players and the 3 U22 model in the summer, what they could do is buy Burki down to a TAM that would open up a designated player spot. If they don't want to spend the money on a designated player, they then, I think, could convert Falu Fall's contract from a U22 to a youth designated player contract. That would then give them 3 DPs. It would then open up a U22 slot, and then they could use that U22 spot in the summer. So the bottom line is, yes, the announcement that Roman Burki is going to be a designated player undoubtedly, or not undoubtedly, potentially holds back their ability to add what we've been talking about for the last few weeks, which was, as we've always kind of framed it, 1 DP, 1 U22, and 1 TAM player as their 3 big moves. And we've talked about that a lot, and we've gone through the positions that it could be. So does this potentially take that down to the best case scenario is 1 DP and 2 TAM players? I still think that's completely reasonable. I think that gets St. Louis City to a much better spot, especially at those spots. And we're going to talk in a few minutes, some comments that David Critchley made about what those spots may be. So yes, does this hold back our original plan of a designated player spot, a U22 spot, and a TAM as the 3 big moves for St. Louis City this offseason? It does. I still think I don't see why, and this is why MLS rules are stupid, but I don't see why as soon as the new league year starts, and again, St. Louis City across general allocation money and target allocation money, St. Louis City is looking at about $12 to $16 million of extra money. Well, no, sorry, let me do that again. My apologies. Like $8 to $10 million in extra money. The extra $6 million is the salary cap. So we're talking about $8 to $10 million of allocation monies in one way or another. If they're on the U22 model, which gives them $2 million extra, or it could be around $6 million. Bottom line is they have the flexibility to move these things around if they need to. And they'd have the TAM to buy down Burki. Now, there is a limit how much you can buy down a player's contract. That's why when we look at the roster profiles, and this is something if we get into the weeds and you look at roster profiles, if you see a designated player and they have the little triangle above their name, I know that's not the technical term, but I'm going with it. That means they can't be bought down because their salary is above the 1.7 million by such a number that they can't be bought down. So I would be shocked if Roman Burki's contract is not able to be bought down, at least in the summer. I don't see why that means they couldn't buy it down in February and then open up that designated player slot as the season starts, but before the window closes. I don't see why, with the weirdness of MLS rules, why that would be a problem for St. Louis City SC right out of the gate. So that's everything to do with the Roman Burki extension and how it affects the roster build for next year. Obviously, getting Roman Burki in the building for next year, in the next 3 years potentially, is a big deal for St. Louis City. It was job number 1 of this offseason, and they've knocked it off. Now they have a lot of other things to do. They got to get a sporting director. They have to get a head coach, and they have to make another dozen roster decisions. Eggplant emoji jumped in early. Let's get to his comment here as we do move on from talking about the Roman Burki extension announced pregame and move on to what happened in this 2-2 draw against RSL. Eggplant emoji says, flipping the script and turning a loss into a draw, not the worst way to end the season. Hopefully it's a springboard for better days in 2026. Yeah, the first half is everything you want to forget from 2025. And I think it was funny that Edu, Roman, and Critch, and maybe this was just Critch's point, and Edu and Roman went to town on it after hearing him mention it in the post-game talk. But Critch's main point was tonight felt a lot like a 90-minute like quick reel of 2025 season for St. Louis City. Start off bad, right the ship, fight till the end. That's kind of their narrative on what this city, what this year has been for St. Louis City SC, and that's what tonight was. It would have been nice to see a lot more fights at the ends to maybe they'd be in the playoffs right now, but you know that's in the past, and there's no need to waste time on regrets. So hopefully it's a springboard for better days. Hopefully that first half doesn't happen again next year, because that first half is everything that was bad about St. Louis City SC's 2025. They were open. The transition left them completely wide open. They were turning the ball. They were turning the ball over in the midfield, which was exposing their fullbacks, which was exposing their defensive midfielders, who sometimes would expose themselves, but nonetheless, that would exacerbate situations. Those two goals were just pathetic. And they're also the kind of goals that get scored in a game where it's pouring down rain, because no one's, tying together 18 pass sequences when it's monsooning out there like that. So, of course, it's a bunch of mistakes that compound into a transition attack that go the other way that are these two ridiculously open goals. So, yeah, that first half, just throw it in the trash. It was bad. Watch it to criticize and then move on. Kyle Hebert and Valu Fall, both of them stepping up, getting wide, complete discombobulation on the defensive side of things. Chris Durkin getting way too high. What else is new? I actually thought Tots and Valum were fine. They both covered the back post in ways that, had they done it earlier this year or going to last year for certain players, maybe St. Louis City is in a very different situation in both of those seasons. So the fullbacks weren't necessarily the problem. They were just caught out of position by turnovers and dumb plays further up the field. Stop me if you've heard that complaint about St. Louis City SC this season. So a lot of the first half mistakes we talked about ad nauseum. We don't need to talk about that anymore. The positives of the second half, there's not a ton. It was some gritty goals that they were able to score. I love the long throw-in play. Header passes are something that is, in my opinion, completely underutilized in all levels of soccer. I watched the Premier League. I watched Serie A, Ligue 1, MLS, USL, high school. Not enough players pass the ball using their head in the box. And so seeing City set up one that had long pass from Padelford, long throw from Padelford, header off Fall, and that was the main crux of the play. But then we also get the header from Fall goes to Klaus, and then Klaus puts another one in, and he was probably putting it on goal. He did get the goal because I think it should have been an own goal against the Rapids player, but I guess he didn't change the angle of it. But Brendan McSorley's right there as well. So if Klaus is passing to him or not, either way, two header passes and a man on the back post kind of affects the goal. I loved everything about that second goal for St. Louis City. It utilized the strengths of the team. It utilized an underutilized aspect of soccer. I loved everything about it. Abo, Turner will be a DP next season in New England. If they can't flex the Burki deal down, it's malpractice. I doubt they committed that sin. Okay, I'm glad you said that, because something in my brain was going off that I was getting something wrong. I feel, though, that the Matt Turner situation, Abo, and you might be correct, I might be wrong here, but off the top of my head, I believe the Matt Turner situation is that he's a DP this year when he was coming over on the loan. But when he gets purchased for full-time starting next season, he's a TAM player. And let me confirm that right now as I look up my U22. And yes, okay, so Matt Turner is in on a loan with the Revolution. He is right now a DP player, technically, because Roman Burki was bought down prior to this summer. Technically, Matt Turner is the only DP goalie in the league right now. But the funny thing is they will actually trade that thing again, because Matt Turner's deal, when it's completed, goes to TAM in 2026. So that's why I had it in my brain that Burki's still the only DP goaltender, is because in 2026, as it is right now, Turner goes back down And to your point, that actually speaks to your second half point there, Abo. If they can't flex the Burki deal down, it's malpractice. The only other DP goalie, it was built into his deal from the get-go that he was going to be a DP for 6 months, half of a season, the back half of a season, and then he was going to be a TAM when he goes onto the roster for the full haul. And I don't have the roster profiles brought up. Let me grab the roster profiles for fall 2025. Let's see how long Matt Turner's future deal is with New England. Because I mean, I guess contract length doesn't really matter as much if you're not dealing with transfer fees, because it's just literally because then the number you're looking, because usually when you're trying to break down if a player's a DP or a U22, if they have to be, you take the transfer fee plus their salary total divided by the years the deal's over. So if you're just dealing with transfer with contract value, it's the same every year that it's over the deal. So it doesn't matter if you're not dealing with transfer value. That's why my point is Roman Burki's salary, unless he got a big raise from what he got paid the last 3 years when he was one of the highest paid goaltenders, if not the highest paid goaltender. I always blank on that one. There's no reason that he got a large enough raise, in my opinion, that he won't be tammable at some point. I could be wrong, but that's my theory right now. Matt Turner's part-time deal or future deal with New England would be for 20. So his loan. Okay. Here's the thing. My apologies. And I'm not sure how this works exactly. Turner's loan is through June 26th. I guess they might be able to buy him this winter, and maybe that's when they can turn him into a TAM player. I don't know. It's confusing. I don't work for New England. I'll do that research at another time. But bottom line is, to your point, even the other team that has a DP goalkeeper, they built it in that they would be able to move him down to a TAM. And that's my thing. I understand the people who are worried and are negative on this deal because it's a designated player. And my caveats are, I'm with you. If the contract value is enough that Roman Burki has to be a DP for the entirety of the 2026 season, I'm with the people who are criticizing the move a little bit, because I don't think it's impossible, because this idea, and I've seen it before, you can't have a designated player in the MLS, or you can't have a designated player goalkeeper in the MLS. I don't think that it's not tricky. I don't think that it doesn't mean that you don't have to win in other areas for it to work. I just hate that kind of simplistic, myopic thought. 15 years ago, people would have told you that run pass options and read options couldn't work in the NFL. Up until the Dolphins started running that Wildcat stuff with Ronnie Brown and Ricky Williams, people would have told you cannot run the read option in the NFL. The defensive ends are too fast. The linebackers are too fast. They'll eat you alive. Joe Flacco pulls the ball down and gets a first down the other night with the Bengals running the read option in the NFL. A jump shooting team cannot win a championship in the NBA. Ladies and gentlemen, the Golden State Warriors. A home run, you can't win by just hitting home runs. That used to be an axiom in baseball. Like there are these axioms in sports that I think for the most part are bullshit. And the fact is that, yeah, for 90% of the teams, you probably can't win that way. But if you actually build the team in a smart manner, and if you're a good drafting team, if you get quality players who are built to play that system, you can win playing different kind of systems across sports. You can't be that simplistic. There's always a way to win. If everyone's zigging, you can zag, and that will work. It's been proven across every sport thousands of times. And so this idea that you cannot have a DP goalkeeper in MLS and win, I throw it out. I'm not saying that you can. I'm not saying that it's easy. It should be the most common build, or it's the easiest way to build a winner in MLS. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can do it. Do you have to spend more money in certain ways? Yeah, sure. But let's not get into the spending money aspect of things. the bottom line is you can still do it. You can pay Burki this amount of money. You can get him onto a TAM level contract probably at some point. And if not, you can work things around because you're not having to pay, because you're not having to worry about TAM him down, then you can switch to the 3x3. And then you can do, like I said, you can move Falu Fall from a U22 to a youth designated player contract. You can TAM down another player next year after you TAM down Zhao Klaus this year. So there's different things you can do. There's different ways you can build this. There's never one way. There's never one correct way. There's always angles that teams can find to be a little bit different. You can't do this. You can't do blank in MLS. I call BS. You can't build it. You can't win with defense in the MLS. I'm sure that's something that's been said because everyone tells me it's an offensive league. Not saying it's not an offensive league. That doesn't mean you can't win by building a stalwart defense or being a team that creates havoc in midfields. We've seen teams win by being like, or you can't win high pressing. You can't win with high pressing in this league or something like that. Or you have to play defensively solid soccer in Italy, or you have to play possession soccer in Spain. For the most part, yeah, again, you're correct. 8 out of 10 times, that's probably true. But there is a possible other lane to take. And if City decides to take that lane, you can criticize them if they fail to win in the other parts of that team build. Because that's what happened the last 2 years. At no point did Roman Burki's contract or roster status hold back St. Louis City SC. There were plenty of other roster mistakes. The majority of them were on the margins. When the 20th spot on the roster needs to be opened up and can't be, that's where St. Louis City was running into an issue. When there were 5 or 6 players who were on this roster who weren't even TAM level players, who weren't contributing because they weren't available, and Roman Burki criticized that. Roman Burki went, availability is sometimes better than ability tonight. Roman Burki went old school on our ass tonight in the postgame. And so there's a lot of roster mistakes that St. Louis City made over the last 3 years. Could some of them have been avoided if they didn't have a goalkeeper taking up the DP spot? Honestly, I don't think at any point did that affect it. This team wasn't going to go out and spend a lot of money that would have been DP level contracts. You can get TAM level players at really good deals. You can spend a couple million on a TAM level player, and he can be a game changer. It's a truth across every playoff team in the MLS. They have 2 or 3 TAM players that they've spent a couple $1 million on who are impact above average players in the league. That's a fact. And City has to go out and do that. That's where they have to win this. It's the meat of the roster. It's not one spot. Roman Burki, in fairness, he was a top 3 goalkeeper, undoubtedly his first 2 years in the league. In fact, he was one of the best goalkeepers the league has ever seen his first 2 years in the league. This year, the numbers got pulled back. If you just break down the last 8 or so games, though, he's back to being a top 5 goalkeeper in the league again. And I think at any point in this league, if you have a position where you have a top 5 player, you can get away with putting him on a DP contract in this league, and you can still build a playoff plus level team. That's not holding you back. Everybody in this league is burning money on a DP spot. Like almost every team, at least one DP spot, is just burning money. You're not wasting money with Roman Burki taking up a DP slot. You're just not. That is well spent money. It's well spent money than so many other DP slots that are currently being used in MLS, and teams are getting nothing from them. I get why it's a criticism. I think this one though is looking for something bad in what is ultimately some very good news. It's fine, but combined with the Aussie being loaned and still a U22, City is just hamstringing what they can do. You can win. You just have to thread the needle. Yeah, you got to be good at your job. And listen, I've already criticized Jake Girdwood-Wright being loaned and them not getting enough money from Auckland City on the loan to reopen his U22 spot. That's a bad. That one, in my opinion, is the one you should hang on. And I don't think Burki being a DP exacerbates it. Like I said, there are multiple ways that they can still have an open DP spot, DP spot. Worst case scenario, they still have a U22 spot. And again, look at some of the quality players you have out there who you can get on TAM level contracts. Would this have made things a little bit easier? Yeah, getting Burki on the TAM level contract from day one would have been a lot easier. But I can't get over the fact that I don't think they gave him like a $500,000 raise. So I don't think we're looking at a guy who has like a $2 million contract or $2+ million and can't be bought down. I firmly believe everything tells us that this is going to be a tameable contract, if not right out of the gate, then in the first 6 months. And you know, they probably, until they switch the contracts or switch the schedules, like Roman Burki talked about in the presser on Thursday, there's still going to be big movement happening for St. Louis City SC in the summer, because that's when Europe opens up again. So if they can open up that DP spot in the summer, I think all of this is for naught, because they got plenty of spots to open up tonight, this offseason. And in fact, let's get into what they potentially can do with those spots. Actually, we got a couple comments here. Eggplant Modi asked the Tampa Bay Lightning how investing between the pipes pays off. Yeah, it's a little bit different. In hockey, I think. I don't know. That's you know what? I have to talk this entire time, and so I can't spend the thinking time to think. Do goalkeepers in hockey matter more than goalkeepers in soccer? I mean, they would have to, right? They can face like 30 shots. If you have a crappy one, he lets in 4. I mean, yeah, it's probably more important in hockey, come to think of it. Yeah, it's probably even more important in hockey. I don't know. I probably shouldn't even have needed time to think about that one. Conversely, asked the Edmonton Oilers how investing between the pipes pays off. And to that point, I think Burki makes sense, because I actually think it works into the team build of this team. I think that if you're going to play pressing soccer, and I know some people don't want that, but let's go to the shared screen and let's get Edward Leuven's presser up. Let's see if I can find my thread from Edu, because this is something that I think is interesting. Oh, that's a terrible, terrible screen to share. That's a much better one. You guys can actually read those on the screen. Let's zoom in a tad bit. So this is the one I want to focus on right here with Edward Leuven. So Edward Leuven was asked about what he would want to do for. You guys don't need to see more of me. That's just me being vain. So he was asked what he would want City to do this offseason. And here was his answer. Well, to be very honest, it's a tough question to answer. We don't have a sporting director. We don't know who's going to be head coach. That's supposed to be head coach, not good coach. My apologies. Against the ball, we want to be aggressive. Coming back to the roots, how we started for now, we should be on the ball, the team in the last couple of months that can create a lot of chances. We need to restart. We need to come back to those roots defensively. So I'm really excited for the future. The thing I want to focus on here is against the ball, we want to be aggressive. Diego Gigliani has talked about how their ethos is a hardworking blue-collar team. Edward Leuven clearly wants to keep playing the high-pressing mentality. I think that's a consistency I've seen from St. Louis City people, is that they want to keep being a high-pressing team. And to me, a high-pressing team, especially one that uses the fullbacks as aggressively as St. Louis City always has, that's a team that needs a really good goalkeeper, because constantly they're going to be exposing whoever it is between the pipes to really juicy attempts. And if they want to consistently be able to win games 2-1 or 3-2, they're going to need a goalkeeper who keeps away a lot of those really good attempts. So City needs, full stop, an above average goalkeeper. They can't get away with a guy who's just kind of okay, just barely above average. They need a plus goalkeeper if they're going to keep playing, as Edward Leuven says, against the ball. They want to be aggressive. That is always, no matter how good your players are, wanting to be aggressive on the ball is going to lead to, because to be aggressive on the ball, you have to take steps forward on the ball. What did we see tonight? Edward Leuven, Chris Durkin, Conrad Vollum, Thomas Totland, Falu Fall. They took steps towards the ball. Bad things happened in the first half. And so they need an above-average goalkeeper. They have one right now that is an above-average shot stopper and an above-average distributor. That's really hard to find, and letting it walk because of the roster constructions of the MLS, I think that's what they weighed, and they decided they couldn't do it. I don't think that's inherently a wrong decision, because again, the idea that you just can't do it because of the league is incorrect. it could be a wrong decision if they fail to follow through with the whole plan. But as we go to another one of our post-game threads here, let's find Roman Burki. Roman Burki right here. I had a lot of talks with Diego. They showed me what they want to do. They showed me things that I can't tell here because they trust me, who they're trying to bring in. For me, it's a sign of how interested they are in being a winning club. I take this as a thing, and this I talked about this before. My big thing with St. Louis City Cardinals, with any sports organization I'm covering, I need to see people who I believe have a plan. Diego Gigliani, there's a lot of reasons to criticize his run since he arrived here mid-2023. I trust, based on the comments from Diego, that they have a plan to fix the defense in front of him and build out the team the way it's supposed to be built out. That's kind of my main reason why I'm willing to see what the plan is, and why I'm not willing to say out of the gate 100%, well, this plan is flawed from the get-go. No, there's plenty of ways you can make this work. I don't know how to say BK Rumsieg. I'm going to go with BK Rumsieg. About 12 minutes behind on the stream. I don't think Bogert reports it as a DP contract if it can be bought down. He's too precise with that stuff. He reported as a max TAM or something similar. And that's why. And that's why I think it might not be able to be bought down the first half of the year. But I think you'd still report it as a DP contract if his salary is over 1.7, whatever the exact number is. If his contract is 1.9, which is still tammable, you would still report it as a DP contract. But I still think because it's still technically a DP contract. It's just it would then be tammable based on the amount of money they could buy it down by, because for City, the restriction of them being able to buy it down as tammable is going to be the amount they're allowed to buy down contracts. It's not going to be whether or not they have enough allocation money. They are swimming in allocation money. Whether or not they do the DP roster profile, or they do the U22 roster profile that gives them 2 more in-game, they're swimming in allocated money right now from the MLS. So buying players down will not be an issue. Whether or not they can or not will be an issue. He'd be reported as a max TAM or something similar. That's an interesting point. And that's why I kind of changed my mind about them being able to potentially buy him down like in February before the season starts. But I just see no reason unless they gave him a big raise. And it would surprise me if they signed a player who is just honestly, yes, 2 seasons were incredible, but he is 34 years old. He turns 35 in a month. So he's a 35-year-old. And I know goalkeeper, you can say, age doesn't matter, but he turned 35 in a month. Is that a guy that you're giving him a raise by 500 grand, which is what would conceivably take him out of the ability to be bought down to a TAM level? That's my only question. And again, I'm not trying to question Tom Bogert's reporting at all. Tom is flipping fantastic at his job. I love following Tom. I love listening to him on podcasts and things like that. Once we start doing more podcasts on this channel for City, I'm going to ask Tom to be a guest whenever I can. So I'm not trying to question his reporting at all. I am throwing out questions because the MLS's roster construction rules are, how do I put this, dumb and a hindrance to the popularity of this league, because I have to spend time talking about it like it's this bullshit. It's not apple to oranges comparing goalies in different sports, but I agree it's a worthwhile investment keeping Burki. Yeah, and that's what you're going for, eggplant emoji, and I 100% agree. I think this team really needed to figure out the spine. I think that's why Falu Fall coming in at a big contract was important. Getting your center backs figured out. That's why I think one of the biggest decisions right now, yes, sporting director and coach are huge decisions, but those ones are nebulous, and it's hard to tamp down, and there's so many variables, and if those guys are able to succeed in their deals, that's another thing. For me, the entire offseason for St. Louis City now, for me, comes down to the Henry Kessler option. Because having a Henry Kessler and Falou Fall center back pairing, or as opposed to a Timo and Falou Fall, and then having to figure out what the depth is behind them instead of just having Timo as the depth behind Kessler and Fall, that really changes how I view the defense going into next season. And the defense, how I view the defense is also going to be greatly affected by whether or not they add a fullback and things like that. And while we're talking about that, I'm going to get up another one of the threads, because while we're talking about Diego and Burki, and did they sign or who's the coach and who's the SD, I did think this was interesting from David Critchley in the postgame presser. He was asked about what additions this team could make in the offseason to get better for 2026. And obviously for a guy who is the interim head coach, who doesn't conceivably, as we know it right now, have a sporting director ahead of him, I thought it was an answer. He talked about how they're able to create a lot of goals centrally with Klaus and Cello. When I look at it from an attacking standpoint, we created goals with Klaus and Cello. We definitely want to be a team that creates moments from wider areas. We also need to be very organized defensively. A profile for this is a really good defender against the ball. And he went on to say that defender against the ball he said, I want to, this is my profile. I don't care about position. He goes, that defender could be a 6, could be a center back, or could be a fullback. So Critch mentions 2 things: a wide attacker and a defensive stalwart at the 6, center back or fullback. If you've been on these streams, you know that is exactly what we've been talking about as the offseason plan. I know if Abo wants to jump back in on the chat, if he's still watching, he's a loyal listener. He's been very big on exactly what Critch mentioned. Find talent who can score goals from the wide areas. Get me a designated player right winger. That's what Abo would say if I could bring him here as a co-host instead of just being on the chat. We'll see if he jumps in the chat as well. So that thought is very well heard inside St. Louis City. David Critchley wants the ability to attack successfully from the wide areas. I think that's an interesting point for a couple of reasons. One, I thought Sangbin Jeong has been good. He's earned call-ups for South Korea, and he has an option this year. He would be one of your U22s. I think you pick it up. You also have Makai Joyner, who continues to grow. He gets that start tonight. I think he has so much talent. That move late where he takes the defender on one-on-one, gets to the touchline and whips that cross in, which Totland is almost able to volley in for a goal, but it hits off the crossbar. So much talent from Makai Joyner. I legitimately believe he is an MLS starter quality player, if not better than that. So Critch saying this, I wonder if that's why we don't have to worry about there not being a DP spot opener. There not being a DP spot and a U22 spot. Because maybe their thought process is, with Sangbin Jeong, with Celio Pompeu, with Makai Joyner, and with Brendan McSorley, we want to add more depth. We want to add more talent to that group. But because of that group showing us some talent this year, we don't need to spend money to get a person who 100% supersedes all 4 of those players. So maybe that's why you can get away with bringing in a TAM level wide attacker, putting him into the churn, and then every game you have the best of Sangbin, Makai, Celio, new player to be named later. In that way, they're pulling from always kind of a position of strength, and that competition in the depth is always pushing the team. Maybe that's one reason why they don't feel they need multiple designated player U22 slots, because they want a wider attacker, but they do have some talent. So that's one thing with Critch mentioning that I want to talk about. And then the defensive stalwart at the 6, the center back or fullback. Eggplant Amoni jumping in on the chat. If they add a fullback and a 6, would that be enough to get back to the playoffs? No, I don't think so. I agree with everybody that they need a little bit more attacking punch. There's no doubt in my mind there. Where do they get it? I agree with what I just said. I wasn't saying that scenario I just threw out there for my health. I think that if you need to add more talent into that group of wide attackers. Sangbin's young and has showed something. Celio had a really rough year, but he's passionate and he puts in bangers. And so I say, give him another chance. And he's cheap. He's got a good deal for another couple of years. And again, Mackay and Brendan, we know that this team believes they have high potential. And so you can't sign a player. If you sign one big name winged attacker, that means that all four of those guys, unless an injury happens, all four of those players are fighting for minutes in one spot, a start in one spot, and then three other guys are then fighting for 20 or 30-minute runs off the bench. I don't think St. Louis City wants to completely push Sangbin, Celio, Mackay, and McSorley all to that potential bench role. You could argue that you're fine with them pushing one of those players, but I think everyone listening would agree with me that St. Louis City does not want to push all four of those players or three of those four players to the back of the depth chart and stop them from ever being able to get minutes again. And that's kind of what you would do if you say we have one everyday attacker at one of the wing spots. We still have the other wing spot open. You're holding back some young players. You're holding back some potential. Am I being a little bit too pie in the sky about some of the young players' potential? Maybe, but then again, I'm trying to base this over what I think St. Louis City believes about these players. I obviously want to watch Mackay and McSorley. I'm always biased towards watching younger talent play. I think it's one of the best parts about soccer is that you're always churning with young talent, always giving them chances. But I truly believe that St. Louis City, especially if certain people remain in charge, have really high marks for Mackay Joyner, have really high marks for Brendan McSorley. And I think Sangbin Jeong has shown a lot in his half season here. Can't relegate all those guys to the bench. Can't, in my opinion, even relegate the majority of those guys to just strictly 100% deep bench roles. But getting back to the defense. So that's why, but I do think you need to add to the offense. Adding a fullback and a six would be huge for this team. It would just be massive because everything I just talked about earlier, if they're going to play as an aggressive team like Edward Leuven wants, you need highly talented players in the positions that are stressed the most by your high pressing scheme. And after watching 3 years of St. Louis City across multiple coaches, it is fairly easy to determine that the highest stress positions in this system are the two fullback spots in the six. Bottom line, full stop. So you have to add talent there because talent is able to deal with bullshit a lot easier. And the bottom line is Chris Durkin needs games like today where he has to be told in the second half, you got to stay back more. Can't necessarily have first halves where your six is getting that free and that open because then it exposes your center backs. It exposes with turnovers in transition, that exposes your fullbacks. And so they need to spend money, in my opinion, on the defensive stalwart at six or fullback, undoubtedly. Fullback's going to be tricky because the guy's going to have to run box to box, touchline to touchline, all 90 minutes. It's why I think it has little to do with the talent that St. Louis City has brought in at the fullback positions. The reason why the fullback positions, especially the left back position for St. Louis City SC, has been transient over 3 seasons is not because of the talent that has been brought in. It is because of what that talent has been asked to do on a game-by-game basis within this system. Because if you look at the talent, it was there. Johnny Nelson played left back for a team that won the title 2 years ago. Anthony Marcanic is the best offensive left back in the league this season. Clearly, those guys had talent. And yet, they were exposed time and time again by this system. Not because, I believe, because of their talent. And so to get across that and to not have that keep happening, you're going to have to find a guy with a lot of talent to overcome getting exposed by this system. That's why I've always been harping on the fullback spot. Devin Piddleford showed a lot this year. I think they stopped playing him because they really wanted to see what Conrad Vallum was as well as Thomas Totland. They saw what Devin Padelford was. They paid a third-round pick to get an extensive, close look at him. I'm sure it was close enough. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to make a move for Padelford. He would be a great option at the left back spot. But they got to hit big, in my opinion, on fullback and 6, because those positions are always going to be the toughest positions to play in a St. Louis City jersey if they're playing this system. Diego Gigliani talks about it, and the way that Edward Leuven talks about it. While the system might change, the ethos will remain about pressing high and being aggressive on the ball. As long as that's true, they're going to need to create width with the fullbacks, and they're going to need the center back, or the 6, to constantly be in the center of the pitch for those big moments to stop transition. Because when you push forward with guys and you try to take away goalie distribution, and you try to get in the way of press triggers and take away passing lanes and things like that, you're always going to be stretching yourself out and stressing yourself out. So you need talent behind you, because talent in defensive soccer is calmness. That's one of the best ways that talent in defensive soccer is expressed, in my opinion. It's calmness. It's the same way with like offensive line playing football. Calmness. I don't want to talk about you because you're not looking like a chicken with your head cut off. First half tonight, that was some chicken with your head cut off shit. That was the opposite of what you ever see you want your defense to do. Calmness is the key thing. Another key thing I want to tell people about, a good time to remain calm is when you're working with our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook, because you always want to have a cool, calm, collected head when it comes to your betting, when it comes to you making your wagering, building those parlays with our good friends at DraftKings Sportsbook. In Missouri, it's time to get ready because the wait is almost over. What do we got? Just under 2 months, finally, and then the DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook, will be live on my phone in Missouri because it's coming soon to the Show Me State, and you can sign up today. New Missouri customers get $300 in bonus bets when we launch on December 1st, just under 2 months. Download now and place a $5 bet when they go live. DraftKings Sportsbook brings you everything you need to elevate your game day, including live in-game betting, lightning-fast payouts, and endless ways to get in on the action, all right from your phone. When we go officially live in Missouri, you'll be betting with the Sportsbook app trusted by millions. I'm one of them. Safe, secure, and has fast money withdrawals. Download that DraftKings Sportsbook app right now onto your phone, whether it's Android, iPhone, I don't know, do Google phones still exist? I think it's on there too. Use code STL Sports right there on your screen, STL Sports, to grab $300 in bonus bets with just a $5 bet when we go live on December 1st. That's code STL Sports in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus, physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Excludes customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. Check out our friends at DraftKings. In fact, if you were watching the college football slate tonight, that would have been a fun one to watch after December 1st on this side of the river. There's no doubt about that. And a crazy game in college football. I know with the overtime game tonight with Mizzou, that's why we got on a little bit late, because we had to let Mizzou do their overtime and their post game. And then we got on here because I knew we were going to be talking late. I needed more than the 10, 15 minutes I might have had we jumped on immediately after the St. Louis City game. So thank you everyone for joining us late night, because it is officially Sunday morning. So good Sunday morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And you know what we should do here on a Sunday morning? We should tell everybody about our money moment of the game from our friends at Home Bank. They bring you our money moment of the game, brought to you by Home Bank. The money moment of the game brought to you by our friends and our partners here at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank or call 855-577-2001. Money moment of the game is got to be that throw and play. Devin Padelford, late in the game, tosses it in, that long throw that we've seen the Minnesota United player utilize. He came off the bench tonight. He was crucial. The long throw in, it was built to get into Falu Fall, then hits his header inside to Klaus, whose header then finds the side netting after some physical play by Brendan McSorley over on the back post. That is our money moment of the game, brought to you by our friends at HomeBank. Again, check them out, myhomebank.bank. Right there, that phone number on your screen, 855-577-2001. An incredible play to end the game for St. Louis City and tie that one up. RSL still to get into the playoffs. If you were watching that scoreboard, it was crazy. The Rapids and the LAFC were trading goals. Darren Yappy scores one in the 88th minute for the Rapids. That puts them in the playoffs. And then Andy Moran, who's a new player, a new U22 for LAFC. I think that might have been his second goal contribution since he arrived with LAFC about 3 or 4 months ago. He scores in the 90th minute, and that draw knocks the Rapids out and keeps RSL in, who needed a draw tonight against St. Louis City and then some things to happen, or a win tonight. And I think a couple of things could have happened if they would have lost tonight against St. Louis City, but crazy decision day in St. Louis City SC. We'll close out the show. Before we do, Eggplant Emoji asks, any offseason content planned? Listen, with everything that's going to be happening, you can't plan for it, but the sporting director announcement will be followed by a instant reaction. The head coach announcement will be followed by an instant reaction show. Any big moves from the team will be followed by instant reaction shows. When they re-sign or drop, the supplemental players on the roster or the bottom people, not really, but any big transfers or anything like that, when the window does open, that will all be part of the content plan this offseason. And right out of the gate, we're not done with post games, ladies and gentlemen. I've been working with City in this. I'm really happy to announce that tomorrow, should everything go correctly, St. Louis City City 2 is having their first round playoff game. And if you guys don't know, MLX Next Pro does this really cool thing where you get to pick your opponent. If you're the top 4 seed, you get to pick one of the top. You get to pick, or I guess top 3 seeds, because the 4 seed gets left with who's ever left. Top 3 seeds get to pick their opponent. St. Louis City picked the 8 seed, so they have their first playoff game tomorrow night at Energizer Park, and I will be doing a post game from the City 2 game. And also, because there's not as many rules or regulations around what the players have to do after games, and there's not as many rules around post games, we'll be doing our City Central post game live from the City 2 game, and we'll be joined by some special guests. First of all, hosting the post game with me tomorrow will be Justin Horniker. You might follow him you might follow him on X or Blue Sky. He writes for St. Louis Magazine. He covers City for St. Louis Magazine. He also writes for MLS.com. So Justin Horniker will be my co-host for the post game, but also, if everything goes correct, is how I'll put it, we're going to be having some special guests join us live. So for the first time, if everything goes right, knock on wood, City Central post game will have the first ever live guests on a STL Sports Central post game tomorrow evening, live from Energizer Park for the City 2 first round playoff game. And hopefully they keep on winning. We can keep doing City 2 playoff game post games like that, because they are the first seed in the MLS Next Pro playoffs, which means they have home field advantage through the playoffs. So hopefully they can keep winning and we can keep doing post games down at Energizer Park, because I was able to do one tonight at Energizer Park. It was so darn late. I didn't want the support staff to be kicking me out, because they would have kicked me out a long, long time ago. We would have gotten 12 minutes of this post game. So we were going to go much longer today. So that is some of the off-season content planned. Once we know who's here next year for the SD, for the head coach, for the players, we can start getting some more content planned. And heck, once the SD and the coach happens, we'll start getting some more stuff going when it comes to the guesses at what the big moves are. Just to kind of preview, my plan is to put together some lists on free agents to watch for. Obviously, I'm not doing a lot of research on the Bundesliga right now. So my free agent look-ins are going to be MLS players that I think St. Louis City needs to look at, because I think one big thing we saw this year is playing in the MLS is different from a lot of other leagues in the world because of the time differences and the size of the country. So getting guys who have been through that grind, getting guys who are used to going to flying to San Diego and then flying back to St. Louis. And then the next weekend flying to New England and then flying back to St. Louis and then flying to Montreal and flying back to St. Louis. Though players who are used to that grind, I think is a legitimately important thing that St. Louis City has to take into consideration when they talk about who they bring in this offseason. And so I will be looking at a lot of the available players, whether that be in trades, transfers, or free agency from the MLS this year, because the grind of the MLS will matter when you look at who needs to be brought in for St. Louis City next year. And if they ignore that, I think we're going to be running into more problems that we ran into this year. And again, it's Roman Burki got a little cliche on us. Sometimes it's availability is more important than ability. And what we do know is that players who are more acclimated to the grind of the MLS are available more often than new players coming from Europe and other leagues who have never had to deal with it. And that's just a fact of the matter. Still behind, it's B. Krumsig. Oh, okay. I could have guessed that. The most TAM you can use to buy down a contract is $1 million more than the budget charge, which was $700K this year. The max charge for 26 is $800K. Then any contract over $1 million or whatever max TAM is next year cannot be brought down at any time during the offseason, regardless of how much team the TAM has. Any contract over $1.8 million. Yeah, that's my thing is I just wonder whether or not it's going to be over $1.8 million. That would be a raise of a few $100,000 from Roman Burki. Were other teams willing to give him more than that? I doubt that. Did he need more than that to stay in St. Louis as opposed to an LA move? Maybe, but that would be by my count, that would be a $300,000 raise for Roman Burki this year if they're paying him over $1.8 million. And if that's the move they made, then yeah, it won't be bought down. That's why my entire point has been I don't think they gave him that big of a raise. But I could be wrong. And that could be extremely material because they give him $300,000-$400,000 more than last year. And I think Henry Kessler's option, my best guess is Henry Kessler's option is about a $400,000 to $500,000 boost in contract. And I really do think that might be pejorative and not based on his actual contract or talent level, but what's Roman Burki just talking about? Henry Kessler, unfortunately, would be one of the highest paid, be third or fourth highest paid player on St. Louis City at 1.5. Off the top of my head, I believe that's correct. Maybe fifth or sixth. You'd be one of the higher paid center backs, higher half of the league off the top of my head, I believe. Do you want to give Henry Kessler that kind of raise if he's not consistently available? That's tricky. In my opinion, that's a tough decision. That's kind of one of those decisions I'm not glad I'm getting paid to make, because my initial reaction is Henry Kessler is 100% worth that money if he's on the field, is the caveat you then have to add. So I think, is the gross money that big of a deal? Like, is that actually something that's going to come into play with St. Louis City? Like, if they're giving Roman Burki X amount of money, does that mean they don't want to give Henry Kessler X amount of money? No, I don't think it comes into that. I think a lot of these discussions that we're having are much more about, can you fit everything into that precise little hole that the MLS demands you do within the roster profiling spot? That's why B. Krumsig is here, throwing out, so much math. Unfortunately, at no point have we ever been able to say or promise any of our listeners that these shows will not include math. Thank you to the MLS. These shows always have to include math. Thanks, MLS, for forcing me to do things I haven't thought about since high school. I guess that's a good thing. Maybe MLS can help us get our math scores up better than some of these other countries with much more established football leagues and also much better math scores. Because I hate having to do all this math crap. I wish it was just, is the player good enough for the contract? Are they above average? I wish we could have a lot more simpler conversations about whether or not a player's value is enough. And I wish there weren't so many damn restrictions. Because there's no doubt about, in my mind, that Roman Burki would be worth that money, even, if you talk about like the salary cap and those kind of things. I just hate that the way the MLS works, we're always talking about these 6 damn roster spots. It undoubtedly makes for some easy article writing, and you always kind of have something to write about if you're covering the MLS. But the amount of time in my life that has been spent focusing on these 6 stupid roster spots across these 30 teams, it's a little disconcerting is my main thing. But that's what this league's about. And that's why, and that's also just why the designated player stuff is so fascinating to me, because as you go through this league, you just see that it's not the guarantee that so many people think it is. Like off the top of my head right now, teams that have multiple designated players, where at least one of the spots isn't partially wasted. I mean, San Diego undoubtedly can't harp on that. Dreyer, Lozano, absolute winners. LAFC has Bouanga and Sungmin, absolute winners. Those teams are easily the gold standard. But almost every other team, there's at least one spot. Nashville's pretty good too. Mukhtar, Surridge, Zimmerman. And Zimmerman's a designated player, center back, but that's probably not going to – his contract ends this year. I doubt he signs at that same level and is a designated player next year. But, I mean, it's just – I'm not trying to make excuses for St. Louis City. I am just saying that a lot of times I think we get into these conversations and we say, we'll get a designated player, get a U22 player, get a TAM player, and we think that the guarantee is that the designated player is going to be a world beater, the TAM player is going to be above average, the U22 is going to have all this talent that's going to eventually come into the team. It doesn't happen like that. You're still, for the most part, throwing darts. And so locking in what you think is a known commodity in Roman Burki, I don't think that's the worst way to spend a DP spot. It's not the best. It's not the most efficient. There's no doubt about that. Everybody, wants this to be, I think if every fan could choose, they would all choose that their designated player spots would be like Cincinnati, and teams would pour out something like $30 million or just under $30 million for 2 wingers, strikers, big names that can score from anywhere at any time, like Danke and Evander can, although Evander does it much more often than Danke does. I'm sure every team would like that. It's just not realistic that it's going to happen for everybody. City's got a lot of work to do. Like, I don't want to gloss over that. They got a lot of work to do, and this could easily be a, just silent little move that doesn't really go anywhere. Because if they don't fix the spine, if they don't find more center back depth, if they let Kessler walk and they decide to have Timo as the next starting center back, then they have to, as David Critchley says, they have to look at a ball playing or an aggressive defensive player. Center back might be the spot to go get it if you let Henry Kessler walk. They have to get better fullbacks, whether that means finding the confidence in Thomas Totland again at the right side and then adding a quality left back, or giving Conrad Vollum that spot. They have to improve at 3 or 4 spots, hard stop. I don't think the Burki deal stops them from doing it. And that's kind of my overarching reason why I don't think it's a problem. To be Krumsig's point, maybe they're not able to buy it down at any point this season. I believe means they probably wouldn't be able to buy it down for probably the first 2 years, or maybe not even until the option year, depending on what the option is. So too early to completely say. But had you asked any St. Louis City fan a week ago, heck, on Thursday when Roman Burki spoke in the pre-presser conference, and some people took his demeanor as a negative, some people took the comments he made as a sign that he had already made this deal, and it turns out they were right about that. Whatever your opinion is, and what you were thinking on Thursday, I think you should be happy that Roman Burki is going to be here next year. The criticism about how they got him to stay next year, that certainly could be coming in the next 6 months to a year. And we'll keep you up to date on that criticism right here on City Central and STL Sports Central, because we're always breaking it down here. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight and into this morning. Again, big thing tomorrow, City 2 postgame. We will be going live right here on STL Sports Central for a City Central postgame. I'll be joined by STL Magazine and MLS.com's Justin Horniker. And should everything go well, we'll be having some special guests on the postgame as well. So there will be playoff soccer played in St. Louis City tomorrow. It's not first team soccer. It is just MLS Next Pro, but some chances for some real hardware to be added to the organization this season, even if it's not first team. Could be exciting. Brendan McSorley got in the game late today. I expect him to start. With Mackay getting the start tonight in the MLS, I expect him to be in reserve duty if they need an emergency goal late tomorrow. Either way, I'm excited for the City 2 game tomorrow night. Thank you so much for everyone joining us tonight here on the City Central postgame. Thanks to everybody at STL Sports Central for working their asses off tonight, getting all our postgames going. We had Blues, we had Mizzou. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, who commented. You guys are the reason we make this happen. Shout out to our sponsors at Home Bank. Check them out at myhomebank.bank. And of course, check out the DraftKings Sportsbook, where the crown is yours. Have a great morning, St. Louis.